What's happening? MC Marcus Chapman here, ready to break down show number 18 in MC 25. Show I did on July 16, 2014. It's called MC, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. This was done on KBFB 97.9 The Beat, Dallas, Fort Worth. All right, it was a Wednesday, matter of fact, not Tuesday, 2 to 7 in the afternoon. That's what I was trying to say. All right. Now, so here's the backstory to this particular show. I joined, even before I joined 97.9B, let's back up. I was living in Atlanta, and I was supposed to be on V103 WVEE. I ended up making a few appearances on there, but I was never officially hired, and I'll go into that in a couple of shows from now. And then in 2012, because at that time, 2008, 2009, a lot of radio companies stopped hiring, period. They had hiring freezes because that was when the economy went bad. And so around 2012, things started to pick up a little bit more. And I was actually up for a job in New York at WBLS. It was a midday opening. And I was one of the candidates. Skip Dillard was the PD, and me and him had some interaction. You know, he was really considering hiring me for that, which I was really looking forward to. But then what ended up happening, their competition at the time, WKYS 98.7 KISS FM, they got sold to ESPN. So they became an ESPN station. So there was this sort of a merger that they called it. Several of the people who were on KISS moved over to BLS, and that included the person who was doing midday on KISS. She became the midday person at BLS. So that ended my chances to be on BLS in New York. So I ended up being up for another job a few months later in Dallas, Fort Worth at 97.9 The Beat. And I ended up not getting hired for that. The person who got hired, a cat named Jesse Salazar, who I later found out was a former co-worker of the PD, Mark McCrae. So basically he hired one of his boys he worked with before. And that was the end of that. But they had something part-time. I really didn't want to do part-time radio anymore. I've been through the, ups and downs of that, especially the downs in Chicago. But at the same time, because I had been out of the industry at this point for like maybe 4 years, I realized in my time out of it, I kind of needed to be in it to be able to move forward with a lot of other things I wanted to do beyond radio. It's like, because I had a background of being a radio personality, it was hard. People didn't seem to take me seriously when I was trying to do other things because I wasn't on the radio. Not because they were listening to it or even could listen, because sometimes they weren't even in the same market. But as long as I was on air, I was going to be able to do some things beyond just radio, even if it was just part-time. Say, like, for example, there was a book deal that was possible, and they didn't want to do it unless I was on the radio, and I wasn't on the radio, so they didn't want to do it. All right. So eventually, what I ended up doing, I'd been in Atlanta for 4.5 years. It wasn't working out. It wasn't going to work out at that point. So I moved to Dallas so that I would have a chance, and I had a really good chance of being back on air if I moved. And there was nothing really anywhere else that was happening. So I went ahead and moved to Dallas in November 2012, met with Mark McCrae, and, we talked and everything. And what ended up happening, it took a little while because, Radio 1 owned KBFB 97.9 The Beat. And, they have a thing where they can only have so many employees in each department and all this kind of stuff. So an opening came up, the opening that was already there, that got filled because he hired DJ Menace to mix on 97.9. Another one of his boys that he had worked with in Florida, in this case. Jesse, they had worked together somewhere else in Texas, I believe. So it took a little while, but I was still in the mix. It just wasn't gonna happen right away. So in the meantime, what I had done, I was working in the hotel industry. I used my job in Atlanta at a hotel to transfer to a better one in Dallas. It was the same company I was working with, a Marriott. And so I was doing that in the meantime, and then eventually I stopped doing that. I worked at a different hotel, and eventually the hotel industry is just not for me. It's not my thing. I never had any issues with hotel people before that, but I found that that wasn't really the industry for me. So I will never do that again. I was mainly a shuttle driver. I was really good at it, but not my thing. So at a certain point, finally, it was time for me to get on, which was in 2014. I ended up being hired with Radio 1 Dallas in March of 2014, and I did my first show March 22nd, I believe it was. It was a Saturday night, 10 to 2. And it was funny because the first weekend radio show that I had professionally, the first weekly show, was the After Set in Chicago, and I started that same weekend. I started March 22nd of 1997. So that was kind of interesting. So I was doing the Saturday night thing. It was a mixed show. It was really just a chance for me to get back into the flow of being on the air. So, I was doing that every week. I started doing some fill-in stuff on other shows. I eventually started hosting a Sunday show as well. But this particular show here, the July 16th of 2014, this was significant because it was the first time I was going to be on an afternoon drive. They had Ricky Smiley Morning Show, which is national in the morning. So I worked that show in terms of just engineering it in the studio, but I wasn't talking on the air or anything. But Vita Local was the afternoon host, and she still is. She's been there for a long time. I remember Vita from when I worked at K104. I remember us actually talking. She was just starting with 97.9 at that time. I think she had just come from Shreveport, Louisiana. She had been working there. So she started working at 97.9. That was back in 2002. So I remembered her from that. So, I had been working at 97.9 for a couple of months at that point. But this particular day, I was really looking forward to because I knew afternoon was the biggest audience that you could have on that station as an on-air talent. And I always considered myself to be a person who was tailor-made for afternoons. Because unlike most people in radio, I never wanted to do mornings. Because for one, mornings is a team situation, and I prefer to work in the studio by myself. Unless your name Dr. Love, we probably not going to jail that well in the studio. And, it's just easier for me. I like to report to just be me and the listeners. I can communicate with them one-on-one, do what I need to do. And in most cases, you're going to work by yourself anyway. And then also, I just don't have that much to say early in the morning. I'm more so, I never really listened to a lot of morning shows. I'm just not a morning guy like that for a radio show. I always saw afternoon as the best show you could host because you pretty much get the same audience that a morning show has, but you don't have to wake up extra early to do it. Morning people got to be up, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, to get the information and get ready to do the show if they're starting at 5 or 6, whatever. Afternoons, you can live a more normal life and still have that same audience. You bring them home, working by yourself. You can host events at night. You ain't got to worry about not getting enough sleep and all that kind of stuff. So I remember being really, I won't say excited, but I was ready because I knew this was going to be a chance to make a strong impression with the 97.9 audience. And I was ready to have some fun with it. And I went in there that day with the mentality I was just going to kick ass. And that's pretty much what you hear coming through in that show. The big difference, though, is that in this era, coming back to radio 2014 and working beyond that, it's a lot different from how it was before. It wasn't, topics. The Dallas-Fort Worth market isn't really a topics market, say like a Chicago where we would do topics and people would call in and voice their opinions. Not so much of that down there. And plus, I remember coming up to that station before I got hired one time, just being in the studio. Melda Mack was guest starring for Vita. And I remember seeing a memo from like somebody in corporate that had some things they should and shouldn't do. And I remember one of them was not to ask questions of the day, that type of stuff, because they didn't want to do that. So I found that real interesting. But this particular day, not only was it afternoon drive, but one of the biggest concerts ever was coming to town. They were giving away tickets. That was the tour with Jay-Z and Beyonce. In my entire career, there are 3 concert tours that totally shut the radio stations down to the point where all the phone calls was pretty much people trying to win them tickets. And if you were trying to do anything else on the air with the phones, you could forget it, because folks wasn't trying. They was just calling and over again. Can I get tickets? So there's 3 tours where that happened. The first one that I remember was Lil Bow Wow in 2001. Matter of fact, one of the shows I almost chose, or at least was considered for the MC25, is a show I did in 2001 on K104. Well, I called it Lil Bow Wow Mania. It was actually the day of the show, and people were still calling for tickets, like 30 minutes before the show, calling the radio station to see if they could get tickets. All right, so that was one. The second one was 50 Cent in 2003. I was at GCI Chicago at that time. It was like, shut the phone down. Everybody was trying to see 50. That's when he was hot, in the club and 21 Questions and all that. And the third concert tour that was like that was Jay-Z and Beyonce in 2014. I mean, everybody was just extra excited. I think Beyonce on her own would have did that. Jay-Z on his own, he had a concert tour the year before that. But the two of them together, it just caused pandemonium amongst the audience. So everybody was calling, trying to win these tickets. And that's why I titled it MC, Jay-Z, and Beyonce, because it was all about that concert. And people, as you hear, calling in, trying to win tickets. Matter of fact, 2 of the funniest calls came back to back in the show. The one where the guy calls and he basically tells me he trying to win the Beyonce tickets, and he was going to lie and fake to his girl and tell her that he bought them because she broke up with him, and he was going to try to use the tickets to rekindle the flame. And he was a real straight up country dude. He was cursing in the conversation like we were talking on the street. And instead of editing the curse words out, I just bleeped them. So, because I wanted the audience to hear, the energy of the call and everything he was saying, because we couldn't put the cuss words on. So we would just bleep them out, So I thought that was hilarious. You see me laughing because of stuff he was saying. And then the other one came right after that, which was shorter. A girl who just called, she's just like, Beyonce tickets, Beyonce tickets, Beyonce tickets. I'm like, what, you think you just don't say it over and over again and that's going to help you win? Like, don't work like that, But that's just how it was. It's like even the calls that I got that didn't even go on the air, people was just going crazy trying to win these Jay-Z and Beyonce tickets. And it just wasn't no getting around it. But there was still other parts of the show that had to be done. Like, for example, Vita did a thing and still does a thing called the Hot Mess, where, she'll talk about something crazy going on in entertainment news. So in this particular show, it was the Love and Hip Hop ATL reunion where they was going crazy, fighting and everything. And then there was another one I did about Cat Williams, some mess he got into with somebody. And what I tried to do, I did what I call the MC Marcus Chapman remix of the Hot Mess, where instead of using the different sound effects and funny little clips that Vita would add in, I just got a listen off the lines and I'll talk to them about it and let them react to it. And I use that as the Hot Mess because I like to interact with people. I ain't want to just be saying it myself. And then plus I hadn't been there that long. I didn't really know how she got all that stuff in there, which I later found out how. But at that time, I was just like, I'm going to get a listener and interact with them and make that the Hot Mess and tell them the info. Later on, I was told, because I worked for Vita a lot when I was at 97.9, I was told just not to do the Hot Mess no more at all because it didn't feel right without all that. And I got that, but I kind of got a kick out of doing it my way for the show. But hey, so you hear all of that. Matter of fact, you hear a lot of celebrity-oriented news. Like, I didn't really used to do that in my career. But it's a lot of stuff in there. Chris Brown and Drake had got together to work on some stuff. You heard that was hot in the news that day. I mean, just this whole era is so celebrity driven. You get that feeling in the show. And even in other shows that I did for 97.9 The Beat, they were very celebrity oriented because that's just how it is now, And there were a couple others that I considered. But out of all the shows I did in that era, for that station, or this era, I should say, because it's really part of the 2017 era, even though it was 2014. This was the one that really stood out to me. It was the one where I felt like I was really establishing myself with that audience, and And it was the first time I had the chance to speak to the biggest audience on the station. So I was really geeked up about that. I knew people were hyped up about the concert. So it just created a certain energy. The only regret I have is that the way those shows were recorded, you had to go to a website to get the clips. It wasn't like back in the day when you put a tape or a CD in. So the recordings are not as loud as they should have been. And when I put it together in Adobe and edited it all together, I didn't turn the volume up on it. Any of the stuff from 2014, I didn't really do that, so it's not as loud as it could be. Stuff from 2015, 2016, I turned the volume up. But on this one, it's a little bit lower than most of the other shows that I have posted. But that's my only regret. I don't regret anything about the show. In the beginning, I made a mistake and said, yes, I didn't come empty-handed, when I should have said, no, I didn't come empty-handed. But that's not a major thing. So just coming in at show number 18, MC, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. It's entertaining. It's also the shortest of all the shows because it ain't like years before I was recording, the drops that I played and we didn't have all these jingles and all that kind of stuff. That type of stuff isn't really a part of radio. For the most part, this era radio is pretty much just celebrity gossip, giving away some tickets. It's somebody in the mix, and that's it, and that's why it's kind of hard for me to put any of the shows of this era up against the stuff that I did before. Not because it's not good, it's just not, I don't want to be remembered for just giving away some tickets. I mean, that's cool, but I was able to have a much stronger impact in the previous eras of my career just because radio was different and there was more creativity involved. So you hear me being creative, interacting with the callers, but not to the level of stuff from, say, earlier in the 2000s or in the 90s or even mid 2000s, 2006, 2007. But it's still a good show. It's still one of my favorites, and it's one of the ones that I think, it's the one show I think from this era that best defines this particular era of my career. So that second stint in Dallas, this is the show that I think best defines what I brought to the game at that time on 97.9 The Beat. So I'm a Dallas Fort Worth people, I'm a Radio 1 people. That was a good time. It was cool, but I had to move on. So coming up next is another show that's not from Chicago. It's the first show from Indianapolis, and this is another one with a lot of funny stuff in there as well, and that's coming up at number 17. All right, but right now, check out number 18, MC, Jay-Z, Beyonce from 97.9 The Beat, Dallas Fort Worth, July 16, 2014, number 18 in the MC 25. All right.